The huge shift, in my opinion, from just under that age group to this age group is that under that age group, we thrive on how-to kind of advice. So we want lists. Here are 5 bullet points of what we need to do to get ahead.
Boom, boom, boom.
And
Yeah.
it serves very well for that period. But in this messy process, I don't believe that's very useful because it maintains a sense of control. Somebody tell me, it's also disempowering. Tell me what to do. Let me do it so I can get through to the next phase. So the purpose of this book is to go deeper and begin noticing through stories of others, begin noticing how my life, is also changing. So it's a different kind of learning than teaching learning. It's fiction. Fiction is a fantastic way for this kind of thing to come through. There's also an underlying current that only gets revealed at the very end, which reveals a thread of grief throughout the book, which is never mentioned. So we talked about trauma a moment ago before we started. We all have elements of that, but without even mentioning the word, it can come through. So that was a lot of fun when that came together as kind of the final reveal of something that was underlying. And it gives the book a whole other sense that wasn't really talked about directly.
What happens when leaders carry unknown or unresolved grief in them? How does that show up in their leadership?
I can give you an example recently. Chief operating officer of a large company. I was working with the top team. We had a session, a 1-day session, 1.5-day session with the top team, 15 people. He was extremely frustrated with how people weren't moving ahead. And things were not going to plan, and they weren't doing what he wanted them to do, the top team. And then it became evident in one sharing moment when there was vulnerability in the room. His daughter was 18. She was about to go away to college. They lived in Singapore. The family lived in Singapore, and he was elsewhere. He was traveling around Southeast Asia and had missed seeing her growing up like that and getting ready to leave. And now, as she was about to leave, he shared how she would never live with him again. And he was emotional. And what hit me at that moment is that he was taking out that frustration on the people around him. Like, I can't be with my daughter and I have to be with you idiots.
Right. How did that show up in his behaviors with the team? Was he short with them? Did he yell at them, or did he ignore them? Like, how did it show up?
He would get very rigid and tense with them and demanding and micromanaging. And I've kind of conflated. I've seen that in several different people. So that's the way I normally see that kind of frustration come through. It comes out, it doesn't come out, well, I'm sure it does at times. I don't often see it come out in like really shouting kind of sessions, especially in Asia. People are a bit more careful with that. However, it comes out, it can be a bit more subtle, but the tenseness is really felt. And so it creates tenseness around everyone else. And once he was able to see that and have a bit of a laugh about it, it eased things up. A lot of things changed for him over the following weeks with that. What I don't know, but what I suspect and what I hope for him is that it also, by letting go, by not holding so tightly on this thing of, I will never have my daughter at home again, I'm missing the last moments with her as she grows up and leaves. I'm hoping that by loosening his grip on that, he can start to envision a different kind of future reality with her, visiting her more often, traveling. So it's that transition which we all go through as our kids grow up. We all go through that, and it just comes out in different ways.
You know, before the pandemic, I don't remember reading or seeing much about grief in leadership, literature, or work. And since the pandemic, though, there's definitely more written about that. I'm curious what your perspective is on the reality of our workplaces, which, just sort of,
Yeah.
if I really generalize it, people feel more lonely, they feel more separate, there's just a lot more disconnection, a lot more shortness. Do you think that there's grief at the sort of cause, or I don't want to say cause, but do you think grief is causing some of this?
Yeah. And for me, the word grief is anyway, it's a loss of something.
Right.
In the traditional sense, a loss of a loved one, but it's also loss of an identity, loss of a
Yeah.
label. Something has changed, and that can feel very much like the loss of a loved one. Loss of certainty. I think one of the biggest things with the pandemic is on a massive scale, we've all experienced loss of certainty. We don't know
Yes.
what's going to happen. We don't know where we're going. And still, we need to be able to live and find joy and all that. So I see the same thing you've seen. There were two top team retreats that I did, not this one that I was just talking about, two other top team retreats that I did soon after the reopening after COVID, within a couple of weeks of each other. And this is the CEO and the top. There were small teams, 6, 7, 8 people. And even though there were interviews before doing the retreat and in order to design the retreat and all that for them, still organizational grief and trauma came up in both of those
Mm,
situations, which had not been surfaced or raised before. And once it came out, it was able to be talked about and things were worked
right.
through. There are things that work through pretty quickly once they come out. I was struck by how those came out in such similar ways in completely different companies and completely different countries. And the only thing I can see in common is something with the
With grief.
pandemic having put us into a deeper mode